Tourette's podcast is not a medical advice show. It's a show about experiences. In the course of that, we may talk about medications or therapies or stories from the doctor's office, but don't mistake any of that for medical advice or direction. It's not. Get that only from people or places licensed or certified to give it. Not from a massively fun and action-packed podcast about our life experiences. Such as...
I know how much it meant for me as a kid to hear from somebody with Tourette's, right?
This is Tourette's Podcast. I'm Ben Brown. So after season 2 ended, and before this one started, there was an interim episode. It was actually one of the most listened to episodes of this podcast, and it was a timely one. It was back in January, when we talked with the wonderful David Begnaud, the CBS News correspondent who, in late 2018, opened up that he had Tourette Syndrome. Quick update, by the way. Not long after that episode aired, Begnaud was picked for the George Polk Award for Public Service for his amazing reporting on Puerto Rico and the state of things there since Hurricane Maria. But Begnaud came on the podcast to talk about his opening up on TS, and one of the effects that we saw at the time, one of the effects of him opening up, was that he had heard from a lot of fellow news reporters out there who also deal with TS, some openly, a lot secretly. But it inspired them to open up too, because what Begnaud did, and talking openly as such, he was the new point of reference for a lot of people when it comes to Tourette syndrome. And as we do here in talking with Touretters around the world on this podcast, it was just the fact that we had a new voice to hear from and connect with. And that really meant a lot to the Tourette community. Big moment. And it was especially important to the Touretters who share Begnaud's line of work. And okay, so we're going to put a pin in that. Put a bookmark down right here, and we're going to come back to it after some announcements and some discussion, because this episode is going to pick right up from that interim episode back in January with a journalist who found that connection with David and decided to open up as well. And he has a really great story. We'll be right back with that. Really good chat coming up. Okay, so you remember Patrick O'Leary, right? He was episode 7 of season 1, and you'll remember Pat's a video game developer who had a lot to say about workplace inclusion and understanding of people with TS on the job. Well, a little bit after that episode, he appeared in a video from the Tourette Association of America giving good advice to employers about inclusivity and accommodation and understanding.
Hi, my name is Pat O'Leary, and I've been a professional video game developer for over 8 years now. As an adult living with Tourette, I've unfortunately experienced some negative interactions at work. These were mainly driven by a lack of understanding or even knowing that I had Tourette. Employers have a vested interest in all their employees succeeding. So, here are 5 tips you can share with your employer for supporting Tourette in the workplace. Tip 1. Tics are not constant. Some days, your employee may appear less symptomatic than other days. This does not mean they are not struggling.
This video will be in the show notes to this episode at tourettespodcast.libsyn.com, and I'll share it on social media again as well. The update is that on a set of really large windows at a sizable cafeteria on the Redmond, Washington campus of Microsoft, there is now a full-on graphical representation of Pat, like a giant window mural. And it looks amazing. It had a budget. And it's a rendering of Pat, and next to him in large white lettering is a quote from Pat. And it says, "Misunderstandings create barriers. When I found nothing to explain my Tourette to my team, I created it." End quote. And so I asked Pat how all this came together, and he said Microsoft was, and I'm reading directly from Pat now. He says, quote, "They've been formulating a big inclusion push and wanted stories to feature that touched on a few pillars of inclusivity, including awareness, curiosity, and courage. This poster showed up just this week, and there's an internal website at Microsoft promoting all the featured stories. Super happy to be able to have a platform to talk about this more publicly." Pat, thank you. That's awesome. Everybody who missed Pat's episode, that's season 1, episode 7, Patrick O'Leary, video game developer at Microsoft, living with TS and doing important messaging about what makes for a good work environment. All right, couple more things real quick, and then we're underway with the main part of the episode. We got to get an answer to Katie from episode 0 of this season. Remember, she asked us how we deal with tics, like, sniffing when we're actually sick, or tics that hurt in vulnerable times. How do we deal with that? Well, that question got picked up in the Tourette's podcast discussion group on Facebook with a participant named Amber saying that her 8-year-old son has the same tic, a sniffing tic, and it flares up when he's congested. So Amber said they try a nasal spray, a decongestant nasal spray they buy at the store when things get bad, and it seems to be working or providing some relief from that tic. And then 2 other listeners, one named Anna and another named Reggie, and Reggie, we actually spoke with him in season 2, both said really similar things, and I'll just read Reggie's response since it's right here in front of me. He says, quote, "I try to find something else to do and or try to break the tic. I know that's not an option for some. If all else fails, I try to take some cold medicine that helps me sleep. Sick with tics. Sucks." End quote. Okay, another quick email from a listener named Luana. She says, "Hi, I'd love to know more about stimming and sensory processing as it relates to Tourette's." End quote. Which I confess to possibly not being the most knowledgeable person. What do you guys think? What's your experience with stimming and sensory processing? Help me get some responses to Luana. You can email me at tourettespodcast@gmail.com, or you can take it to the discussion group on Facebook or tweet at Tourette'sPod, and we can talk about it, and Luana can see what you guys had to say about stimming and sensory processing. Okay, last, definitely not least, we also saw this week the release of an impact survey, or the results of that survey, I should say, from the Tourette Association of America. I'll put up a link to it, and I've been tweeting about it as well, but basically it's a set of results from a web survey on the impact of Tourette syndrome and tic disorders on individuals and families. And some grim numbers, really, regarding suicide and self-harming. Looks like the survey responses were mostly adults replying on behalf of children who have Tourette. 30% of respondents were adults who have TS themselves, and, well, these numbers, says here 83% of children felt that TS negatively impacts their school experience and education. 42% of children felt the biggest challenge in managing TS was dealing with co-occurring conditions. 34% of parents report that they lost their job or they are not able to work as often due to increased caregiver duties of a child living with TS. 18% not able to afford medications or their preferred kind of medical care for their child. There's a lot more here to absorb, including breakouts for adults. A couple more stats from the survey results. It says 68% of adults have felt discriminated against. Not totally surprised there. 47% of adults don't feel their symptoms are adequately controlled by existing medicine. And there's a lot more to go through here. It's heavy. It's also really important to document and put context to and have conversations about what's needed and how we can make it happen. Read the impact report. Let me know your thoughts, and we can talk more about this stuff. Right now, though, let's talk to a guy named John Bedell, and we're going to revisit that pin, that bookmark we put down a few minutes ago. John is a journalist, a TV news reporter, who spoke up about having Tourette syndrome after seeing David Begnaud do it. John had been thinking about it, but David was the push he needed, and he did this really great and really relatable and responsibly done TV segment on the TV news station he works for.
In local TV news, how we present ourselves matters. A bright tie, hair, makeup, a crisp blazer, all for a sharp image. But I'm opening up about something you probably don't see. I have Tourette syndrome. It's taken a lot for me to say that out loud and publicly. Frankly, I've never really liked talking about my Tourette's. It brings up uncomfortable conversations and questions and unfortunate jokes. But that all changed just a few weeks before Christmas when one of my favorite reporters, David Begnaud at CBS, did a story opening up about his...
My name is John Bedell. I'm the weekend evening anchor and a general assignment reporter at WHIO TV, which is the CBS affiliate in Dayton, Ohio. And I'm also the postgame host as a part of our coverage of Dayton Flyers men's basketball on our radio sister station, AM 1290 and News 95.7 WHIO, here in Dayton, Ohio, the birthplace of aviation.
It's funny because I'm in North Carolina and we claim a right to aviation as well. There's this license plate feud. I think yours says the birthplace of aviation, ours says first in flight, and that's been this fisticuffs kind of thing for a long time. I think between Ohio and North Carolina with the Wright brothers.
Yeah, it's always the contention that Orville and Wilbur just had to go there to borrow the wind.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we were just the venue, and all the the science and development was out there in Ohio. I guess we have to concede that at some point.
Yeah.
But there's a lot I want to ask you, but let's just go ahead and talk about what's been happening with you recently. I mean, you've been a reporter on camera. That's your career, and image or that sense of identity and what the audience knows about you is most definitely a consideration. So, but pick it up from there. What's been so significant for you over the past, week or so as we speak, being in late February? What's been up?
So I opened up publicly then for the first time about my Tourette's. As I've been telling people, I think my wife and my closest friends and family would agree to this, that I've always been a very strong and very educated advocate on behalf of myself. Mm-hmm. And I've just decided to turn that more publicly facing. And I've been inspired to do that because, like a couple of podcasts ago, I know that the one episode from one of your seasons, I was listening to you and Ed Buckner talk. Mm-hmm. And at one point, you guys had brought up the point where, there's people that are very quiet and almost closeted about it. And they kind of want to shove it away and not really open Pandora's box and not deal with their Tourette's.
Right.
And the other end of the spectrum is very loud and proud about it, very open. I was sort of somewhere in the middle. I was never... I never volunteered it, but if it came up, I would explain it to people in person. And that was the case all growing up. But as soon as I started my career in TV, which, as you mentioned, is an image field, it's very image-driven, I was always afraid to open up about it because of what I feared it would do to my career. And that was nothing against my company or any of my coworkers and friends here at work.
Sure, yeah.
It was just, unfounded or not, it was just a fear that I had. And I had no interest in telling this story. It aired just recently, and I had no interest in telling it as recently as a few weeks before it ended up airing. So to sort of start my journey, I guess we have to kind of rewind back to May of 2016 because a now friend of mine, Nikki Burdine, is a morning anchor at WKRN TV, which is the ABC affiliate in Nashville. And Nikki's from Tennessee, so she came home to work there. But the station she was at just before then, and the station she was at in May of 16 was WUSA, which is the CBS affiliate in Washington, D.C. Mm-hmm. And Nikki had done a story about her Tourette syndrome, basically her living with it, her journey. And I was really impressed with it. And I had seen it pop up on the Tourette Association of America's Facebook page because I've been following them for years. And I emailed Nikki saying, hey, thanks for your story. It was really inspiring. I think it was cool to hear about your journey. And I'm thinking about opening up about it for the first time. But long and short of it was the timing just wasn't right for me personally then. Although I really did appreciate making a connection with Nikki, and she emailed me back and said, thanks so much. The response has been great. And that she was hesitant about opening up about it too, because she was afraid of, having a job in TV, where she was afraid of, actually got the email right here. She talked about how, she didn't want to, it wasn't that she was embarrassed, that she didn't want to be treated any differently. But then she felt like she reached a point of her career where she'd established a solid enough reputation where it just felt like the right time to talk about it. And she told me, hey, by the way, if you ever do decide the time's right for you, let me know. Well, I reached out to her a couple weeks ago because just before Christmas, was it 3 weeks before Christmas, David Begnaud at CBS, who I so look up to, admire his work, have been a big fan of his for years.
Oh, yeah.
And David did a story opening up about his journey with Tourette's. And I just thought, wow, first of all, I had no idea. And I've got, as I'm sure you do, Ben, you got a pretty good eye for it, like somebody else with Tourette's. And I was like, there's no way does David Begnaud have it.
Right, yeah.
And I sent him a similar note on Twitter saying the same thing, that look, I appreciate hearing your story. It's so brave, and I have it too. Here's a little bit of my story. And I really did honestly tell him, I'm thinking about I told him about Nikki, and I said, for the first time since then, I'm really inspired to start thinking about opening up about my journey, but I'm still hesitant. And he wrote me back very succinctly, Benny. He was like, thank you for your note. I appreciate it so much. I loved hearing your story. It was a lovely note. And he told me, barrel through those barriers so that you too may inspire someone. And that is what touched my heart so deeply.
Right.
And right then and there was when I decided, you know what? He's right. And I did the story and opened up about it just pretty recently here.
Well, it was a really beautifully done segment that, it walks back through your life. It traces back to your youth. You have your mother on there. The feedback, has this opened up an email floodgate? What kind of responses are you getting?
Yeah, it has. I had to carve out time. The story aired on a Thursday at 5:45 in the afternoon, and it was like my email inbox, my Twitter mentions, my the Facebook fan page that I have for work. I mean, the inbox there and the comments were blowing up. We did a Facebook Live where some lady was like, hey, I emailed you like that night. And she's like, you haven't responded yet. And I remember saying on the Facebook Live, like, it's nothing against you. I'm swamped with emails. And I promise I'm going to take some time, carve it out, to knock all these out and reply to every one of them because I want to do that. So I'll get to it and I promise I'll reply. So I ended up taking probably a few hours between Thursday and Friday nights just to make sure I responded to every one. And it's been just overwhelmingly positive. A lot of, and I'll give you a heads up too, I'm going to talk about a lot of what David did because I just so identify with his story and so much of what he said. And I remember telling him it was as if like my inner monologue about Tourette's had just like manifested into David's like story and his experience in life and everything because I just so identify with so much of it. And one of the things that I experienced that he did was it's just been this tremendously, overwhelmingly positive response. I've heard from a former colleague who said he has Tourette's and I had no idea. I know a lot of like deputies and cops and state troopers and firefighters in the line of work that I do locally. I had a firefighter that I've seen at scenes and was at a firehouse with just a few weeks ago. And he messaged me and said, hey, remember we bumped into each other. I have Tourette's and here's my story. I've had friends of my parents who have reached out to me and said, hey, I'm friends with your mom and dad and our kids are a little younger. And my son was just diagnosed or my daughter was just diagnosed. Can you help us out? And just, it was so inspiring. And could you maybe talk with my son or daughter or whatever, other adults, other people in our viewing area who have kids, grandkids with it, and well beyond the Dayton area? And it's just been overwhelmingly positive response to it. Just people talking about how much it meant to them. Yeah. And sort of, I think it came across without explicitly saying it in the piece, but I was also kind of after, it was mostly to help people with Tourette's, to let them know, one, you're not alone, as David said. And two, like I've walked in your shoes. I know how difficult it is, but I like to think I'm a pretty good example for my little corner of the world that it's going to be okay. And anything you want to do in life, you can do it. Tourette's has never stopped me from doing anything in my life, and it's going to be okay for you. So all I was after was to pay it forward with the inspiration David gave me, and it's been really humbling to see that that's definitely happening so far, and in many more ways than I expected.
So, on the one hand, you could say that, my Tourette syndrome or anything else about my life is my business. I don't need to talk about it with anybody. It's, it's nobody's story but my own, and it's up to me whether I want to tell it. But when someone does come out and say, I have Tourette syndrome, especially if they're in a position where they can be seen, so to speak, it really does generate this excitement and this energy, and it does. It brings other people to say, thank you for coming forward, for telling your story. It's amazing how much it parallels mine. I mean, we hear this so often. One thing I really liked for the non-Tourette viewers of the audience, which is to say the lion's share, that one thing you did that really helped with the relatability of it, and it's awesome you did this. You interviewed not only David Begnaud, but also a couple kids from your, I think they were both in your viewing area with Tourette's and willing to talk about it on camera with you. Has this been a first for you in talking with and connecting with other Touretters?
Yeah, for the most part, because I really only had two friends growing up who had Tourette's. One was a kid who I went to grade school with me. He was, so also like David, I'm Catholic. So I've gone to Catholic school my entire life. So the one family
I did too, yeah.
Yeah, I went to, my home parish, Holy Family, they had a school with the church. So I went through, K to 8 there. And it was another family there that I went to school and church with, but we really didn't know them terribly well. I wasn't really super close friends with them, but it was a connection to make. And then when I got to college, my best friend from college, who ended up just transferring from where I went to college after sophomore year, just because he wanted to change majors and just wanted a stronger program for what he was looking for. He had Tourette's, and that was it, Ben. It was only those two people. So it's been interesting. It's been freeing. It's also been a mind bender because, like everybody I've talked to, it's so, I've always been really informed about Tourette's. I've always been, like I mentioned before, I've always been a strong and educated advocate, and I've always feel like I've really known a lot about Tourette's personally and within my own family unit. But I've never really talked to people with Tourette's. And so to do this over the past several weeks has been such a mind bender in the sense that, like, to hear everybody say almost exactly what I experienced. It's like from everything from David saying, it never passed muster in my household for it to be an excuse. Like that was, my mother said that like verbatim as a kid. And it was like,
Yeah.
Mom and Dad knew it was something I was dealing with, and they were very understanding about it. But I was never, ever allowed to come home in the Bedell household and say, oh, I had a tough day. It was the Tourette's. That I would have been in like deeper trouble for saying that than whatever I did to get myself in trouble in the first place. And I was always expected to live within the constraints of it, where Mom and Dad knew it was something I had to grapple with, and they were always very supportive, and I had such a strong home environment. But at the same time, I was also expected to still be a good student, be a good big brother. I'm the oldest of four, be a good friend, and for a lot of my sports and extracurriculars, still be a good teammate even despite it.
Right. Yeah.
Or even like, and you saw in the package, without any prompting, Brett's mom, one of the kids we talked to, he's a senior in high school, and my mom, almost word for word, had told us differently, or told us separately. Kristen had told her son Brett, it's a part of you, doesn't define you. And Mom, and a day earlier, in an interview that we did 250 miles from where we interviewed Kristen and Brett, Mom had said, I remember telling you when you came to me in fifth grade, like when you were so upset about having it, when she said, when I look at you, I don't see John, or I don't see Tourette's, I just see John. And it's a part of you, but it doesn't define you. So all those kind of little instances.
It's amazing.
It's just been such a mind bender to hear like everybody have the exact same experience, and it feels good.
And this is kind of an insider kind of question, but just curious, since having Tourette syndrome and kind of being closeted about it, often go together. How'd you come to meet these kids and make them feel comfortable going on camera with you?
So David's story ran 3 weeks before Christmas. I got to work on it not long after that. Like I said, as soon as he messaged me, barrel through those barriers so that you two may inspire someone. I mean, I was like, let's go. It's full bore. I'm doing this. I talked to my wife. I was like, just to run it by you. Like, what do you think? Here's what I'm feeling. She's like, I think it's great. Absolutely. But I was just like, let's go, as soon as he told me that.
Right. Yeah.
So I got to work about it pretty soon after. I ran it by, at the time, my old news director who just retired at the end of the year, and now my current news director, because she is news director now, but she and my former news director were the managing editor and news director team that hired me back in 2010 and 2011. I switched over to TV in 2011 after being in the building for a year doing radio. They were both super supportive about it. They were like, I think this would make a great piece. And I got to do it during sweeps, which means that it's special assignments. So I had a full 2 days to shoot it, a full day to write it. So that takes me out of the day mix, and I've got more time to work on it to make it look good, and paired with the same photographer all 3 days. Got to work on it, and I called. It was my old news director's idea to say, well, because I told him, I said, well, I'll never forget the pediatric neurologist that diagnosed me. It's Dr. Max Wisnitzer up at Rainbow Babies and Children's Hospital in Cleveland. And that appointment, while it was just the one, was singed into my memory. And he said, well, first of all, it's nothing against any other of our local hospitals, but I'm sure they have fine experts, but there's not that emotional connection you're going to have with Dr. Wisnitzer. So do you think he still works up at University Hospitals, that network?
Yeah.
I said, yeah, I'm pretty sure he does. So I just Googled him real quick, and Dave goes, well, reach out to him. So that was my first call. I called UH and some of their PR staff and connected with them. Like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. Dr. Wisnitzer, and I could tell this by YouTubing him several times over the years. And right after we decided to do this story, he's very media friendly. He does a ton of media for
Nice.
child neurology. He's very, no offense to any doctors, but in terms of like interviewing with media, he doesn't come off as a doctor. He's very conversational. He's very, outgoing. He isn't very, some docs we can tend to interview in our business are kind of like robotic, and he's not like that at all. He's super conversational, and just so kind and so warm and so empowering. So we got him into place. And then for those two kids, then I reached out to our 4 biggest school districts, I think, and Dayton Children's Hospital, and I told them, hey, look, I'm looking for a kid with Tourette's. I know it's a big ask, but I want somebody 8th grade or younger, because I know that's the time it's most difficult. Because I wanted to help relate to them, and I wanted to, sort of bring that personal storytelling to it, to put a face. I always say in TV, we don't do stories about things. We do stories about people in TV.
Right, yeah.
And that real emotional component of having some of these kids who have it and their families are dealing with it, I thought was a really key component that I wanted to be a part of that story to weave in there. So all the school districts replied and said, hey, well, that's great. We're working on it. One of them was actually able to find me a family that was willing, and that was Brett He's a senior in high school, and his mom, Kristen, they talked to us. And then Alex was the other boy in the story. He's a 7th grader, and he talked to us as well. Mom was super great. She was a little nervous to talk on camera, which was fine because Alex was just so good, and she was so supportive of the interview. And I've gotten really nice thank you notes from the both of them through text and email, and it's been really cool to connect with their families and to share their stories and hear their experiences, and to see how much it's made a difference for the both of them already.
It's really amazing how cleanly this all came together. I mean, it's just one of these magical stories where everything just kind of aligns, and you're able to knock it out of the park that way. And and as we said, your mom made an appearance too, and clearly, she's the one who can make the best observations about your childhood and growing up, and kind of what she had to kind of deal with to get you situated. But I mean, can you tell us about the early signs or symptoms that indicated you might have TS? Do you know that story and how that how the diagnosis came to be?
Yeah, and one of the bites that my dad said too, or the one bite from him that really kind of spoke to me too, is that he had talked about how seeing Dr. Wisnitzer was really like seeing an old friend, where he felt like 21 years ago this summer he was telling us, because he was so empowering to tell us, like, basically learn as much as you can about it and go forth and conquer. He doesn't need medication. I don't want to over-medicate the kid, just unless you guys feel he needs it, and come back and see me. Otherwise, learn and go forth and conquer. And Dad had said it was almost like seeing an old friend, where he was telling us 21 years ago, see, I'm telling you guys it's going to be okay. And sure enough, here we are 21 years later. So to rewind to, I think I'm pretty typical, and Dr. Wisnitzer kind of reaffirmed this, Ben, after reconnecting with him, that my tics started showing in 1st grade. And that's the first time I remember having them. It was, at the time, I remember having some head movements where I had bangs at the time, and I would kind of like have to shake my head left and right to get my bangs off my forehead. Mm-hmm. And some other ones that I don't really totally recall that young, but I do remember them first surfacing then. I remember Mom and Dad telling me, and never in any short tone of voice, just, I think this is probably a lot of Touretters would sort of identify with this, where they were like, John, stop it. And my response was, I can't. Like, I don't know what's going on, but I can't stop it.
Right.
And we had gone to my pediatrician, my family doctor, who we're still very good family friends with today. And I remember Dr. Mark being like, well, Alice, he isn't having seizures. And my mom's an RN. And she was like, well, I understand that. But like, what's going on? So we kind of brushed it aside, because mom recalled in the interview that we did, and this didn't make the story that aired, but she recalled feeling like, as a parent, with this popping out of left field, even with the medical background, she was like, I don't know if I want to open Pandora's box. Let's just close it and we'll see what happens. Well, then, and I don't remember this, but Mom did recall this specific conversation in the piece, where she said, I came to her in 4th grade. I think it was by the end of my 4th grade year, and I was so frustrated with it. And I said, it was starting to worry me. I said, Mom, why is this happening? What is my body doing? Like, I need to find out why this is happening. So we went back to the pediatrician, and he said, look, I think it's probably Tourette's, but you guys are going to need to see a neurologist. And you mentioned earlier how all these kind of dominoes fell into place, Ben. I'm a huge believer, and this is where my Catholic faith comes in again, that everything happens for a reason. And all the dominoes fell into place. The timing wasn't right for me in 2016. It is now. I was able to get my parents, Dr. Wisnitzer, these 2 kids that were so great, just all these different, and David, I mean, my God, I had to try for like 5 weeks to get on his schedule, because you've seen how busy he is. He was literally all over the world. Amazing. To be able to get him and to make time in his schedule to talk to us. But that happened even 21 years ago, where we were supposed to go see somebody. So I'm from Akron, and I always tell people I'm exactly like LeBron James. If you think of it that way, I'm just a kid from Akron. So we were supposed to see somebody at Akron Children's, but our insurance didn't cover it. So we ended up going to Rainbow Babies and seeing Dr. Wisnitzer. And that was the summer between my 4th and 5th grade year. Yeah. I was 11. It was the summer of 98. It was probably typical experience for anybody that goes to see a child neurologist. There's no test for it. It's, the Q&A, it's observation. He was asking me and Mom and Dad questions. And by maybe an hour, he was able to say, yep, you got Tourette's. And we talked about my tics and the severity of them and things like that. And he decided, I don't think he needs medication. It's clear to me that while it's not easy as a kid with it, and I see these, daily, but it doesn't affect his functionality. He can go about his life, it seems like, with the tics. So I don't recommend any medication. If you guys feel differently, let me know. Mom and Dad, and he told us too, like, some of the stuff that you guys talked about, like Haldol or haloperidol, where it can lead to. I remember him saying, like, explaining it to me like on an 11-year-old's level. He was like, it can make you, there's like some cognitive fogginess. It can make it can make you feel like not you, or, weight gain and all these different side effects. He was like, with any medication, it's the risk reward weighing that you have to do.
Yeah.
And we just decided that, I didn't need the meds, and we didn't want to go down the road of some of the potent stuff that they prescribe for it. And we left there with a diagnosis. And that's where he set the table, Dr. Wiz, Ben, for the rest of my life. Because I remember one of the last questions that Mom asked him was, well, did we tell the teachers? And I remember Max being like, yes, of course, tell the teachers. Like, education, education, education.
Right.
The more people know about it, the better it is for anybody who's interacting with you guys, and it's going to spread awareness. And he stressed then, as he did now, the importance of being an informed consumer when it comes to your medical condition, because it's a part of you, but it doesn't define you. And if you're an informed consumer, Dr. Wiz always says to all of his patients about your medical condition, now you flip it around and you understand what's going on, and now you're in control. And we left that appointment with, Mom still has some of the pamphlets from the Tourette. At the time, they were the TSA, the Tourette Syndrome Association, when they were still branding themselves as such.
Yeah.
We left there with pamphlets from them. And Mom always stressed, as I said in the piece, and as Dr. Wisnitzer told us too, knowledge is power. And it was so comforting to talk to him. He was so empowering, and he was so reassuring. And I felt that same thing reconnecting with him just a couple weeks ago when I saw him for the first time in 21 years.
Oh, that's amazing. I mean, so you had kind of your marching orders in life. I mean, it's really empowering, and advocating for yourself and just kind of knowing the power of that. Yet, TS is also a very personal thing for a lot of people. Myself, I never felt good talking about it. Just thought I would be ridiculed, and I would just kind of set a bad path for my life based on negative judgments and being misunderstood and everything. How did you manage that in your life? Was it some people just deliberately hide the fact that they have TS? That's what I did. There are people who are comfortable talking about it with the right people. Some people are just flat out completely open about it from day one. What direction did you go into?
Yeah, so I always really viewed it was just, it was part of it was part of making me who I was and am today.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's maybe more creative. And one of the other sort of interesting things that I've experienced in the last few weeks shooting this story and meeting other people with Tourette's is both those kids, as you saw in the piece, they've got this musicality,
it keeps coming up,
that I know,
yeah.
And I sing. Like, I've always had that. I started in high school. I studied voice for 6 years through high school and college. I was in audition-only groups, both in high school and college, and I still keep, music is a lifelong thing. And I was just like, man, like, everybody has this music.
Yeah.
With, Alex plays the drums, Brett is a phenomenal guitarist on acoustic and electric. I've always sang, and, it always kind of fed into that as a kid and moving into high school and college. But when I was a kid, I mean, I always kind of held that belief that that's kind of what got me through the tough times, because it was not easy for me as a kid. And I didn't get into this in the story, but I said in some of the social media teases and extra content that I did, and I'll tell people this, and my parents know it too, that, I don't look at any of my schooling prior to high school with any sort of nostalgia. And because of some of the teasing I endured, and because kids are mean when you're not different, and some of the kids that I went through K-8 with were just plain mean about it.
Right. Yeah.
And thinking to myself, it's part of, God made me this way. This makes me who I am, and it makes me, it doesn't make me bad. I'm just different, and it makes me unique.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody has something. Tourette's just happens to be my something. But that's what kind of carried me through the tough years, was reassuring myself, like, even if I didn't really want to volunteer it at school because kids were, nasty about it, or it was a tough time of my life, always trying to remember that advocacy for myself, and also the strong home life I had, because, growing up and going to school, grade school in the early to mid to late 90s, we didn't have like social media and stuff, so I could escape it when I got home. And plus, I had a really strong family life with my parents and my 3 siblings, and I had a really strong core group of 4 friends that I had in my neighborhood that I didn't go to school with, who were super supportive and didn't give 2 rips that I had Tourette syndrome or tease me about it at all.
Right.
So those kind of things combined are what sort of, holding on to that advocacy for myself kind of got me through that. And also, as David said, he always talked about how, here again, I come back to David Begnaud's story where it was like his rocket fuel. I remember thinking, Ben, as a kid, like, I'll show these guys. Because I knew by that point I wanted to be on TV. And that's not why I'm in TV now. But there is, as David touched on, there's some ego involved in the business, but I'm in it now because I like telling good stories. I like being sort of the people's auditor, as we talk about, at watching out for the little guy, and just the creative outlet that it allows for my writing and storytelling. I always say I consider myself a storyteller more than a reporter, because anybody can report what happened, because that's all they do. They tell you what happened. But a storyteller can tell you why the thing happened, and they can make you care about it.
Absolutely.
And that's why I view myself as more of a storyteller than a reporter. But the long and short of it is, I knew at that age, by 5th grade, I wanted to be on TV, and I wanted to be a reporter, and I wanted to do radio and TV. And I remember thinking, I'll show these, a word I'm not going to say on this podcast, so you don't have to mark it with the explicit E when you post it. But I remember thinking, like, that was driving me. I remember thinking, I'll show them someday. I'm going to have a career where I'm going to be known and seen and have this reputation, where I, and to be at a point where I can use my unique platform in an image field to let kids know it's going to be okay. Because if I can do this, you can do anything. And then two, I know how much of, and I'm sort of going on a tangent here, but
no, go for it.
To also sort of pay it back, Ben, because I knew how much it meant for me as a kid to hear from somebody with Tourette's, right? And when the times were tough, like for me, the first person I ever connected with that had Tourette's was Jim Eisenreich. And
yeah.
Mom and Dad, because I think you've tweeted a picture of like a ball that you have signed by him, right?
Yeah, I met him a couple times when I was a kid, and I got him to autograph some stuff. I think
that's cool.
He appeared at one of the Tourette Syndrome conferences, but yeah, it's a fantastic guy.
Yeah. So when I was first diagnosed, when we left Dr. Wiz's office, Mom and Dad reached out to him because he has, I think he still has that the Foundation for Kids with Tourette's. Mom and Dad reached out to him, and he sent me back 2 of his cards. At the time, he was playing for the Marlins, which killed me knowing who he was, because I'm a huge Indians fan, and they had just beaten the Indians in the World Series in '97 in crushing fashion. So I was like, damn it, Jim Eisenreich. Like, I didn't like him for playing for the Marlins, but I love that he reached out to me. So one, I knew who he was. I played baseball growing up, and I was then and still am today a huge baseball fan. So I remember thinking, when he sent me 2 of his signed cards, he sent me a card from the Marlins. It was like a 5x8, a little bigger one, signed it. And then he also sent me a card from when he was playing for the Phillies, and that one is signed too.
Nice.
And he sent me a letter, and all 3 of those are somewhere in my parents' house still today. He sent me a letter basically, of encouragement, saying like, look, kid, I know how tough it is. I've been there. I've been in your shoes. But look at me. I play outfield in the major leagues, and I just won a World Series last year. And I remember thinking like, wow, like Jim Eisenreich can have Tourette's. I'm going to be okay. And I know how much it meant to me as a kid to hear from somebody like Jim. And that's kind of why I wanted to, that's what David so inspired me to do, was to decide it's time to turn this around, be more public, and just, that's all I wanted to do was help others. And because I know how much it meant for me as a kid to hear from somebody like Jim Eisenreich, or continuing to grow up, connect with somebody like Nikki and David or Tim Howard or Anthony Irvin, you know what I mean? And so that's all I'm trying to be, to sort of that next generation, or that youngest generation of Touretters who are just starting out. Because, for me, it really leveled off when I got to high school, and it got a whole lot better with my tics and everything else. And I'm just trying to be that support to help, people with it, and just the ripples just hopefully can reach out and help the Tourette's community as a whole.
And have you heard from, I mean, it's only been a matter of days as we're speaking now since your segment aired, but in that avalanche of feedback that you've gotten, has the kid emerged yet who says, I want to be a news reporter, I want to be just like you? I mean, has that happened?
Well, it's funny because Alex's mom, so one of the kids that we spoke to, she says he wants to go into broadcast TV now. He didn't before we spoke, but that was kind of cool. That
nice.
That's been the only one, but it was special to me because I'd sort of developed a relationship with Alex and that rapport with him, and for his mom to tell me that that was something that he wants to do now. That was kind of cool.
Oh, so cool. I love it. But I do want to say one more thing about Jim Eisenreich, just to supplement what you were saying, that when I met him, and I haven't talked about this enough on the podcast, but for one, his kindness, but two, just his presence. I mean, just the fact that like he was playing for the Kansas City Royals when I met him, and I was I guess you could say into baseball. I like the aesthetic of baseball cards and all that. And I was, kind of an avid collector. I still have like thousands of baseball cards just kind of sitting in a closet here. But just knowing that, here's the guy, he's on this baseball card I have at home. I'm learning about him. He has Tourette Syndrome. He's not a bad player. He's even when he was with the Phillies and the World Series stuff. I mean, remarkable. Just to see someone who can legitimately have hero status for a young kid who basically wanted to be him for a while. It was very, very powerful and impactful and hard to get. And then this baseball that I have very few possessions from when I was that age. And I think the fact that I still have the autographed baseball from Jim, I think it says something about the impact that he had on me and just kind of seeing that presence in someone I could relate to and look up to who has Tourette syndrome. I mean, it was just going through those years where I was more ashamed about it, and I'm in high school and I'm a teenager, and there's no way I'm going to let people know I have Tourette syndrome. Like, are you crazy? I'm not going to get made fun of. And that was my thought process, but still kind of carrying him with me was a very, very powerful thing that I haven't talked enough about. So I have to get him, I definitely have to give him some props on just the sense of heroism that he put out there, and not just for me, for a lot of kids. And so I really get goosebumps when I hear of other people who have similar stories of interacting with him or anybody else. From we need more. That Tim Howard is, he's this generation's version of that. And I guess from another angle, there's Samuel Comroe on TV, and there's just with these stories waking up, and now David Begnaud right now, and maybe it's just because I'm paying more attention to it than I have in the past, but it just feels like there's a wake up right now and kind of a new level of broad understanding of what Tourette syndrome is, and just you doing that for your viewership and beyond, because people all over the country and presumably in different parts of the world saw your segment because it got shared out so far and wide. It's a really amazing thing, and the fact that it was so well done, and I keep saying that, but I'm gonna keep saying it. It was such a well done segment that I feel like it really did a service to a lot of people who wanted that to be out there.
Well, thanks, Ben. I appreciate that because, like I said, it was all I wanted to do was pay it forward. And I still get kind of emotional when I talk about what David told me, because it just so touched my heart. And as I tweeted and put on Instagram, and I know he's seen this because he shared it on both platforms and we've stayed in touch. This wasn't a story I wanted to tell as recently as just a few weeks before it ended up airing. Mm-hmm. But he came along and just so spoke to my heart by telling me, you barrel through those barriers so that you too may inspire someone. And he impacted my life in a big way, and I'll never forget it. But you talk about all these people sharing these stories. It's the latest for me, going back 21 years. Jim Eisenreich was the first guy, like, it sounds like you, who to me, showed me something that my great aunt Annette told me when we spoke, when I told her I was going to tell this story, and she's a professional writer. And she told me, you know what? And I used this line in the story, and I told her, I said, Antoinette, I'm going to have to send you a royalty for using this line. But she said, from my point of view, and she's my mother's aunt, it's never been a limitation for you. It's always been a launching pad. And Jim Eisenreich was the first one to tell me and show me, look, kid, it's not a limitation to me. It's a launching pad. As you mentioned, Ben, you don't spend 15 years playing Major League Baseball with, 4 or 5 different teams if you're any sort of slouch at baseball. And he won a World Series. He was top of the mountain, top of the profession with the Marlins in 97. And so he was the first example of that. But between him and then, connecting with you and Tim Howard, who is so outspoken and such a strong advocate. And I didn't know who Anthony Irvin was before the 2016 Olympics in Rio, but NBC was doing a whole bunch of stories about him and his Tourette's. And, he holds the record for the oldest Olympian to ever medal in swimming when he did it in Rio. And he took the record from Michael Phelps. Like, how incredible is that? And he's got, I think, 5 Olympic medals to his name. Or Samuel Comroe, who's a guy I've discovered recently, or Nikki or David or any of these people. It just all kind of comes back to something that one of my other aunts, my Aunt Kathy, when I was sharing this stuff that I was doing on my personal Facebook page, all the content that I was cranking out, and sort of coming out about my Tourette's. I mean, a lot of my close friends know, but like broadly to my friends, where she had said that sharing our stories gives inspiration to those who share our challenges. And that's all I was after here, was I just wanted to pay it forward And I appreciate you saying that you like the story so much, because it was something that is so deeply personal to me. I wanted to be able to tell it in a compelling and a relatable way. And I'll tell you what, I've been doing TV, Ben, it'll be 8 years this spring in May. And it's the hardest I've ever worked on a story. And it's the most proud I've ever been of a finished, kind of polished product of anything, because, it is so deeply personal to me. And because I really wanted to do it right and to let people know what is Tourette's. Here's what it's like living with it. And just as importantly, what it is not.
Right.
Because like I said, I just wanted to try to turn my what I feel is a strong and educated advocacy on behalf of myself and flip it around to help others and to pay it forward and to sort of help the greater Tourette's community as a whole. And then I heard from you, because as David told me in our interview, and this was in the piece, this is the last bite I used, which is where he said, that's all I wanted to do himself was help people. And he goes, and then I heard from you. And if you doing this story can help somebody else, then you know what? That's the great part about being a human being, is helping others. I find it infectious and I want to do more of it. And that was David's line. And that's what I closed the piece by saying what I wrote was, yeah, that's a spirit that we could all afford to catch more of these days. So it's humbling to hear you say the nice things you did about the story. And it's been humbling to hear that it has helped people. And, it just feels good. It's like paying for somebody's coffee at McDonald's, just like behind you, like on a much bigger scale. And for people who can relate to, the really difficult times you've been through, and to let kids who are just starting out know, hey, I've come out through the other side, so to speak. It's gotten easier with age. It's going to be okay. And, I think it's therapeutic. It's been therapeutic for me to reconnect with Nikki, or to connect with David, or to connect with you for this podcast. It just feels good to talk about other people who know what it's like to walk a mile in your shoes. And two, the other thing that, that this does is, everybody has something, and it makes you be able to relate to somebody else whose something might be anxiety or surviving cancer. It just, like I said, that's the great part about it, being a human being, is just helping others. And it's just felt really good to try and do that, and to see that it's done that from my little corner of the world here in Dayton.
Gigantic thanks to John Bedell and all the other news reporters who were doing good things for the Tourette community through their important line of work. Again, I'll have links to John's TV news story about his TS, in addition to other discussion points on this podcast. That'll be in the show notes for this episode at tourettespodcast.libsyn.com. Libsyn spelled Libsyn. tourettespodcast.libsyn.com, Season 3, Episode 2. Let's continue talking in the meantime. Keep the conversation a conversation. tourettespodcast@gmail.com. And you should absolutely hit up the discussion group on Facebook, which saw a really outstanding uptick in membership over the past week or so. I love it. Thanks as always to Sophia for being the admin. Let's keep it going. We'll talk to you soon. New episode next Friday. This is Ben Brown.